Aloha mai kako, hafa day. My name is Paige Okamura, and I'm the Pacific Region Training Specialist for the Pacific Region TTA Center operated by Ka'ananiao LLC, a resource of the Administration for Native Americans. Mahalo to all of you who have joined us for this ANA podcast. As many of our listeners are aware, Native American communities, including American Indians, Alaska Natives, and Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders, have experienced disproportionately higher rates of virus infection and loss of life due to COVID-19. Social distancing and facility closures severely limit Native American communities' ability to meet in person for language instruction, cultural activities, and ceremonial practices that utilize our native languages. With funding from the American Rescue Plan Emergency Language Funding, ANA was able to award $20 million to 210 Indigenous governments and organizations across the country. Today, I have the honor of talking with one of these American Rescue Plan funding recipients, Anne Marie Arceo, who founded Hurrah Academy, Guahan's first Chamorro language immersion school.
Happy day, Paige. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I just want to also acknowledge that the Commission Chamorro, the Chamorro Language Commission, is the mother, Saina, we call elder in all of this, being the administrator of this grant and this money. And so, yes, Hurrah benefits from it, and we are a recipient in the idea or the fact that the administrators are passing on those funds to us. So just wanted to acknowledge that, and very, very grateful today to have this opportunity to be able to share some of our stories from here on Guam and from our Chamorro people.
Thank you for making the time to sit with us today. And I wanted to ask if you could explain to folks listening, how has the COVID-19 pandemic affected your community, the Chamorro community and Guahan in particular?
First of all, we all know that languages, when not practiced or spoken, has limited chance of surviving, especially when it's not being used or practiced. And so in our community, we have ranked our language to be second to the last in the degrees of endangerment of the UNESCO scale. Just knowing that it's an important fact to know that we're critically endangered. That's the endangerment degree that we are at. And that's where the youngest speakers are grandparents and older, and they speak the language partially and infrequently. So even at home, even if the grandparents know how to speak, it's not being passed on. And so given that fact, the kids are out of school from our only immersion school here on the island, and they're going online. And because they're young children, their attention span online is very, very limited. So the lessons, and the interaction is very, very short. So it's tremendously affected the system that we had in place for the kids to be able to come to school most of the day and be around their fluent teacher to practice and hear the language. And the second way that COVID has affected our community is that given the degree of endangerment that I just shared, we are losing a lot of our elders who are speakers to COVID. And so it's really made a big impact. So COVID has really affected our community as far as our language being endangered.
Right. And I think we have seen that also in other Native communities, especially in Hawaii. Any other community that I think is dealing with immersion language education sees similar issues. In Hawaii, it is similar. Most of the parents of our children who go to Punana do not speak the language. So the immersion aspect really is in the classroom, often facilitated by native speakers who are of an older generation. So loss of elders and loss of communal spaces has been really difficult, I think, for a lot of Indigenous people across the world. I wanted to ask if you could explain, and I know you said that the Commission is the recipient. How do you folks plan on utilizing this funding from the American Rescue Plan to support your language preservation efforts?
Well, our main goal is to build capacity. And so in two ways. One is we are partnering with the Guam Community College, the University of Guam, and the Chamorro Studies Division of the Guam Department of Education in coming together to pull cohorts. We're planning on 4 cohorts of 15 teachers to train in immersion methods and immersion pedagogies, because that's what we lack. And so we felt that the best thing to do is to build capacity by, training more teachers. And that way we can be given the COVID situation, because we have to have less students. If we produce more teachers, then we could still, not limit the learning by saying we can't, because we can only have 8 kids in the class. Now even if we have 8 kids, if we have 10 teachers as opposed to 5 teachers, we'll be able to impact even bigger at the greater scale, and also raise their knowledge of language immersion pedagogies.
Yeah, and so that exponential growth, that's what, that's something this funding can support, is not just us in a pandemic right now, but supporting our language communities beyond just the next couple of years. And I wanted to ask if you could share with our listeners who may not already be aware, we talked about the Commission for a little bit, but that Hurrah Academy is Guahan's first Chamorro language immersion school, correct?
That's correct. Full immersion. Hurrah was established and founded in 2005. I had left the Chamorro division, or the Chamorro Studies division, to explore more impactful ways of revitalization, of our language. And so I visited with Ahapananaleo, and that was our model. It's been wonderful the last 16 years, going on 17 years, that I've been working with Pila and, the whole team over there with Ahapananaleo, and just looking at all the different models, of course, adjust to fit our needs here on Guam. But it's been wonderful.
I wanted to ask you if you've noticed any challenges or any struggles with convincing families and parents that immersion is an effective way not only to learn the language, but for education. I think we've seen that in Hawaii, where families don't find value not just in immersion education, but in language education, and then immersion education. We still struggle with those sort of colonial stereotypes that our language and culture doesn't have value. So have you folks found those same challenges with immersion education in Guam?
Most definitely. The group, even just now, if you look at our community of immersion students, in the present, each class has an average of 8 to 10 kids per class. And I think the greatest struggle in convincing parents about immersion education is their fear that their children will not be successful if they do not know how to speak English. That's the stigma, right, if you will, that has been, that they see that they're made to believe. And even though, I've used my children whose first language was Chamorro or is Chamorro, They've been very, very successful. They've been honor students, and there's no problem, and they know how to speak English very, very well today. So yes, we do. We have garnered parents that are very, very, very committed once they're in. But even at the interview process, it's really one parent, and it's mostly the mother who's pushing for this to happen, and the fathers are very, very skeptical. And they're like, oh, I don't know, but okay, we'll give it a try. But once they're in, they're hooked.
Yeah, that's really important. I'm glad you brought that up because I think there is a level of fear and uncertainty amongst parents because also I think part of that fear is that they, on an even subconscious level, understand that it's not going to be just their child learning, that they are going to have to do the learning with their child to really facilitate, everything. It's like we think about when children come home and need help with their homework, and it's one thing to need help with math, but it's another thing to, really keep yourself at a level, and most Native families are working families, but keep themselves at a language and cultural level to match their children, right? That's I think a universal fear and uncertainty in Native communities. I did want to ask, and I know we've sort of talked about this throughout this entire conversation, but I just wanted to ask you if you could, I think, articulate for the listeners, really why is it important to preserve Native languages?
Well, first of all, I think that Native languages is the only one thing that makes every heritage unique. And I mean, we are all people before we're Native Hawaiians or Native Tomorrows. We're all people that can share in love and peace. But after that, what every person brings to the community has to do with their self-identity. It has to do with if we're going to be in a community with people, we can't exist alone unless, it's hard to exist alone. And if we are made to exist with others, then the best that we can bring is knowing your self-identity. And that's what Native language does, is it gives power to that self-identity in being with other heritages and being able to contribute your best. And how could you be your best when this one part is missing or when you have a hole in your soul? Because the one thing that separates you from everybody else is not in you or is not within you. But our language and our culture that makes us exist and tells us who we are is the compass that drives, this confidence to be able to exist in community, to be able to contribute to community. Mm-hmm. And so this is really great. This conversation is, really allowing me to reflect and revisit and look at things from, 3,000 feet above to see what other areas we really, really need to focus on to be able to move forward in our revitalization. So, Spizu Smasi, thank you so much for providing this forum for me to have this moment to reflect on the dream.
No, mahalo nui, Anne-Marie, for taking the time to share with us today and all of your work in your language and for your people. We really appreciate it. So thank you. And this concludes our conversation today. You can listen to our podcast series at acf.hhs.gov/ANA under ARP grants. Mahalo.
Produced by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services.